Hello, and welcome to History for Sleep. When most people imagine the Vikings, they picture something familiar. Fierce warriors with braided beards charging across stormy seas beneath dragon-headed sails. They imagine flashing swords, roaring battles, and villages disappearing into clouds of smoke. It is a world of raids, conquest, and legends that have echoed across Europe for more than 1,000 years. But those moments of violence were only brief chapters in much longer lives. The truth is that most Vikings spent far more nights beside a fire than they ever did on a battlefield. Their greatest challenge was often not an enemy across the sea, but the relentless northern winter waiting just beyond their own front door. Long before sunrise, and long after darkness swallowed the land each evening, survival depended on warmth, family, careful preparation, and a house built well enough to stand against wind, snow, and months of bitter cold. Tonight we are leaving behind the famous raids and heroic sagas. Instead, we will step quietly through the doorway of an ordinary Viking Longhouse on a freezing winter evening. We will spend one long night among the people who called this place home. Together, we will discover how they kept warm when the temperature fell far below freezing, what they ate when fresh food was impossible to find, where entire families slept beneath a roof blackened by years of smoke, and how stories, craftsmanship, and shared traditions turned a simple timber hall into the heart of Viking life. Along the way, we will separate familiar myths from historical reality. Some of the things waiting inside this longhouse may surprise you. Others may feel strangely familiar, reminding us that despite the centuries between us, comfort, family, and the simple hope of seeing another sunrise have always been deeply human desires. But before we open that heavy wooden door, please take a moment to like the video and subscribe if you enjoy calm journeys through the past. Your support allows this channel to continue exploring history, one peaceful story at a time. And as always, I'd love to know where in the world you're joining me from tonight, and what time it is where you are. Reading your comments has become one of my favorite parts of creating these videos. Now, if you are comfortably settled, perhaps beneath a warm blanket of your own, allow the sounds of the modern world to drift gently into the distance. Take a slow breath. Imagine the glow of electric lights fading away. The hum of traffic disappears. The warmth of central heating is replaced by crisp winter air that carries the scent of pine forests and distant snow. It is the middle of winter, sometime during the late 9th century. You have been walking for hours. Snow crunches beneath thick leather boots, with every careful step, never generous this far north during winter, has already surrendered to a long Arctic twilight. Above you, countless stars begin to emerge one by one, scattered across a sky so clear that it seems almost close enough to touch. The moon hangs low over dark mountains, its pale light reflecting from the frozen landscape, until the world glows with soft shades of silver and blue. The cold reaches everywhere. It creeps through layers of wool and fur. It bites gently at your cheeks and nose. Each breath escapes in a pale cloud that quickly disappears into the still night air. Somewhere beyond the snow-covered hills, the wind carries the distant cracking of ice along the edge of a frozen fjord. For a moment, the world feels completely empty. There are no roads, no cities, no distant lights stretching across the horizon. Only endless forests, silent valleys, frozen streams, and the enormous northern sky. Then, at last, you notice something. Far ahead, where the darkness seemed unbroken only moments before, a small golden light flickers between the trees. Another appears beside it, then another. Not moonlight, fire. The settlement is close. As you leave the shelter of the pine forest, the village slowly reveals itself beneath the winter sky. Several sturdy timber buildings stand partially buried beneath thick blankets of snow, their steep roofs designed to shed the weight of long winters. Thin ribbons of grey smoke drift lazily upward from roof vents before disappearing into the cold night air. But one building immediately draws your attention. Long, low, solid, its heavy timber walls seem almost to grow from the earth itself, built to withstand seasons that tested every family who lived here. The carved dragon heads at either end are softened by fresh snow, while warm amber light escapes through the narrow gaps around its thick wooden door. This is no palace, no fortress, no temple. Yet for the people gathered inside, it is the center of their universe. Within these walls, children will laugh, elders will share stories remembered for generations, craftspeople will repair tools by the firelight, meals will be prepared from stores gathered months before, and weary travelers will find shelter from a world that can be breathtakingly beautiful one moment and merciless the next. Outside, winter rules with silent authority. Inside, another kind of world waits, a world of warmth against darkness, of smoke curling toward ancient rafters, of crackling fires that must never be allowed to die. And for the next few hours, that world will become yours. So pull your wool cloak a little tighter around your shoulders, brush the fresh snow from your boots, reach for the rough wooden latch, and quietly step inside. The heavy wooden door swings inward with a slow groan, and almost instantly, the world changes. Only a heartbeat ago, the cold wrapped itself around you like an invisible hand. The wind howled across the snow-covered hills, carrying tiny crystals of ice that stung every patch of exposed skin. Out there, the winter night felt endless, stretching across mountains, forests, and frozen water, with little sign that human beings belonged in such a place. But inside is warmth. Not the even warmth of a modern home, but something alive. The heat rises and falls with every dancing flame. One side of your face grows pleasantly warm, while the other still remembers the cold outside. Tiny sparks leap upward from the fire, before disappearing into a haze of pale smoke, drifting toward the roof. You pause for a moment, allowing your eyes to adjust. The longhouse is larger than you expected. Its walls are built from thick timber planks, each one carefully fitted against the next, to keep out as much wind as possible. Massive wooden posts march down the length of the hall, supporting a roof so high that much of it disappears into shadow. Above, the rafters are dark, almost black, stained by decades of smoke from countless fires that have burned in this very place. The scent is unlike anything from the modern world. Wood smoke lingers in the air, but it is joined by dozens of quieter smells. Fresh-cut pine from recent repairs, damp wool drying beside the hearth, beeswax from candles, tanned leather, cooking broth. A faint hint of sheep and cattle from the byre built into one end of the structure, where livestock shelter during the harshest nights of winter. To someone arriving from the 21st century, it might seem overwhelming. To the people who live here, it smells like home. A middle-aged woman looks up from the hearth for only a moment, before returning to the iron cooking pot suspended above the flames. She offers a brief nod, neither surprised nor alarmed by another traveler seeking shelter. Hospitality is more than kindness here. In a land where winter can claim a careless traveler before dawn, refusing shelter carries both practical and moral weight. The master of the household rises from a broad wooden bench and greets you with quiet confidence. His beard is streaked with grey, his hands broad and rough from decades of work, rather than constant warfare. A thick wool tunic hangs beneath a heavy cloak, fastened with a bronze brooch polished smooth through years of use. He gestures toward the fire. No elaborate welcome is needed. The invitation itself says everything. Warm yourself. You gladly accept. As you remove your cloak, tiny clumps of snow tumble onto the packed earth floor, melting almost immediately in the growing warmth. Your boots feel stiff after hours in the frozen landscape, and your fingers ache as feeling slowly returns. Around you, life continues without interruption. A young girl patiently twists wool into thread, using a simple spindle, her hands moving with practiced rhythm despite the dim light. Beside her, an elderly woman carefully repairs a cloak with a bone needle, pausing every so often to inspect the tiny stitches before continuing. Near one wall, two boys quietly carve small wooden animals from scraps of birch. One proudly holds up a rough horse, no bigger than his palm, before his younger brother immediately insists that his own carving looks far more impressive. Their whispered disagreement lasts only a few moments before both dissolve into quiet laughter. Not far away, an old sheepdog barely opens one eye to observe the commotion before deciding that the fire remains far more interesting than children's arguments. The entire room feels settled, comfortable, unhurried. Outside, darkness has already claimed the world. Inside, time seems to move more slowly. The fire itself occupies the very center of the building. Unlike modern fireplaces built into walls, this hearth burns in an open rectangle lined with carefully placed stones. Thick logs crackle and shift as glowing embers settle beneath them. Occasionally, someone rises without being asked to place another piece of seasoned wood onto the flames. The fire is everyone's responsibility. If it dies during a freezing winter night, the consequences reach far beyond discomfort. Warmth disappears. Cooking stops. Wet clothing cannot dry. The longhouse itself begins to surrender to the cold. Fire is life. You notice there is no chimney. Instead, smoke drifts upward through a simple opening along the roof ridge. Not all of it escapes. A thin blue haze hangs beneath the rafters, softening the firelight and filling every beam of the house with gentle shadows. Modern visitors often imagine this must have been unbearable. Surprisingly, most people adapted remarkably well. The smoke helped preserve the timber against insects, discouraged pests from settling inside, and even cured strips of meat suspended high above the fire. Daily life often involved small compromises that quietly solved several problems at once. As your eyes wander across the hall, you begin noticing details that reveal just how carefully every part of the building has been planned. The walls are lined with raised wooden platforms. During the day, they serve as benches where people work, eat, and gather together. At night, they become beds. Thick layers of straw covered by wool blankets and animal furs transform hard timber into surprisingly comfortable sleeping places. Privacy, however, is almost unknown. Entire families sleep together within the same great hall. Children curl beside parents. Grandparents rest only a few steps away. Servants, laborers, and honored guests all share the same shelter beneath one roof. For modern people accustomed to bedrooms and locked doors, the arrangement might seem unusual. But here, closeness offers safety, shared warmth, shared stories, shared survival. Beyond the benches hang shields, polished by years of handling, though many bear scratches that speak not only of battle, but of everyday use. Spears lean neatly against carved support posts. Axes rest nearby, their blades carefully oiled against rust. These are certainly weapons, but they are also tools. The same axe that might defend a household could just as easily split firewood at sunrise or shape fresh timber for repairing the roof after a storm. Daily life and survival are never separated by very much. The man beside you notices your curiosity and smiles faintly. He lifts a carved wooden drinking cup and takes a slow sip before staring into the fire. Outside, the wind suddenly rises. The longhouse answers with quiet sounds of its own. Timbers creak softly. The roof sighs beneath fresh snow. Somewhere beyond the walls, a horse stamps impatiently inside the adjoining shelter. No one reacts. These sounds are as familiar as breathing. For generations, families have listened to this same conversation between wood, wind, fire, and winter. And they know something you are only beginning to understand. The real battle against the northern winter is rarely fought with swords. It is won through preparation. Every beam overhead was cut months ago. Every bundle of firewood stacked before the first snowfall. Every barrel of preserved food carefully stored during autumn. Every wool blanket woven by patient hands long before the first frost appeared across the fields. Winter rewards those who think ahead. It is a quiet lesson, but perhaps one of the greatest the Viking world has to offer. As another log settles into the glowing hearth, sending a brief shower of sparks dancing upward into the smoky air, conversation around the hall begins to grow a little louder. The evening meal is almost ready. Wooden bowls are quietly arranged. Fresh bread is passed from hand to hand. Someone uncovers a clay pot that has been simmering over the fire for hours, releasing an aroma so rich that every head nearby instinctively turns toward it. Outside, the blizzard gathers strength. Inside, another part of the night is about to begin. And with it comes one of the most important rituals in every Viking household. Not a ceremony of kings or warriors, but the simple act of sharing a meal beside the fire. The aroma reaches you long before the meal is served. It drifts gently through the warm, smoky air, carried by little curls of steam rising from the great iron pot suspended above the hearth. After hours spent walking through snow and biting wind, the scent feels almost irresistible. Earthy herbs mingle with slow-cooked meat, while something rich and nutty hints at barley that has been simmering since late afternoon. Astrid, the mistress of the household, moves with calm confidence around the fire. She has followed this same evening routine through countless winters, and every movement speaks of long practice rather than hurry. Using a thick wool cloth wrapped around one hand, she steadies the heavy iron hook before carefully lifting the pot just enough to stir its contents with a carved ashwood spoon. She pauses. She tastes a single spoonful. Then, with a quiet nod that only she notices, she adds another small pinch of dried angelica and thyme gathered months earlier during the brief northern summer. Nothing here is wasted. Every herb hanging from the rafters represents a warm day, remembered long after the fields have disappeared beneath snow. You find yourself watching the preparation with growing curiosity. Modern kitchens are filled with measuring cups, recipes, and clocks. Here, experience is the recipe. No one measures, no one times. Years of memory guide every decision. Nearby, Eirik kneels beside a large wooden chest bound with iron bands. The lid creaks open to reveal the household's carefully protected winter stores. Inside lie the rewards of an entire year's work: flat rounds of coarse barley bread wrapped in linen cloth, smoked trout caught during autumn runs, bundles of dried onions, hazelnuts collected from nearby woods, a small sack of precious salt, wax-sealed crocks of butter. Every item has survived because someone planned months ahead. Winter does not forgive carelessness. As Eirik hands several loaves to his eldest daughter, Leif wanders closer to the chest, curiosity shining in his eyes. He reaches toward a bundle of smoked fish. Before his fingers can touch it, Astrid glances over her shoulder. She says nothing. She simply raises one eyebrow. Leif grins sheepishly and withdraws his hand. The room answers with quiet laughter. Even across 1,000 years, some conversations between parents and children need no words at all. You smile without realizing it. The warmth of the hall is beginning to soften the memory of the cold outside. Near the far wall, Bjorn has finally finished repairing the broken wooden runner from the sled. He runs one calloused hand along its smooth curve, satisfied with the fit, before setting his tools neatly aside. Nothing is left scattered. Iron tools require too much labor to make. A misplaced knife or chisel could not simply be replaced with a quick trip to a shop. Every possession carries value. Every object has earned its place. As bowls are distributed around the hall, you notice that no two are exactly alike. Some are carved from pale birch, others from darker oak. A few display simple knotwork patterns, worn smooth by years of use. These bowls have served countless meals, perhaps even generations. The benches gradually fill. There is no formal dining room, no separate table reserved for children. Everyone gathers around the fire. The hearth is more than a place to cook. It is the center of family life itself. The flames provide warmth, light, food, conversation, comfort. Without them, the great hall would simply be another cold wooden building standing against the snow. Astrid begins serving the stew. Each bowl receives nearly the same careful portion. Thick barley has absorbed much of the broth, creating a meal hearty enough to satisfy hungry workers. Chunks of lamb mingle with carrots, onions, and dried peas preserved from the previous harvest. Fresh vegetables are almost impossible to find at this time of year. Summer has become a memory. Everything on your spoon represents planning, preservation, and patience. You lift the bowl carefully. The warmth spreads into your hands before the first bite ever reaches your mouth. The stew is simple, but after the long walk through the frozen forest, it tastes remarkable. The barley is soft and filling. The meat has become tender after hours above the fire. The herbs bring gentle bursts of flavor that brighten every mouthful without overwhelming it. There are no spices from distant continents, no peppers, no tomatoes, no potatoes. Those belong to another age. This meal belongs completely to Northern Europe in the 9th century, and somehow that makes it even more satisfying. Around you, conversation remains quiet. People speak between bites rather than over them. No one rushes. Food has demanded too much work to earn anything less than appreciation. The old grandmother Sigrid tears a piece of coarse bread and hands half to little Leif before taking the smaller portion for herself. The gesture passes almost unnoticed. Small acts of generosity often do. Across the room, the old sheepdog finally awakens, stretching stiff legs before wandering hopefully toward the nearest bench. He has learned that children are far more likely than adults to accidentally drop scraps. Leif notices him immediately. A tiny piece of bread disappears beneath the table. The dog's tail thumps softly against the floor. Eric pretends not to see. Outside, the wind grows louder. A sudden gust rattles the heavy wooden door. For just a moment, everyone pauses, not from fear, from habit. Experienced people learn to listen carefully to winter. The sound fades again. Conversation quietly resumes. You realize something unexpected. No one here complains about the cold. It is not because winter is easy. It is because winter is simply part of life. Complaining changes nothing. Months before the first snow arrived, these people cut firewood until their shoulders ached. They salted meat, dried fish, gathered berries, stored grain, repaired roofs, wove blankets, checked every wall for gaps that might allow icy winds to creep inside. This peaceful meal exists because of work completed long before tonight. The Vikings are often remembered for extraordinary voyages across dangerous seas. Yet evenings like this remind us that their greatest achievement was often much quieter. Knowing how to endure, to plan, to cooperate, to keep a household alive until spring. As your bowl slowly empties, Astrid rises once more. Instead of serving herself immediately, she quietly walks to the hearth and places another thick birch log onto the glowing embers. The flames answer with a burst of golden sparks that climb toward the smoke-darkened rafters. Everyone watches for only a heartbeat. Fire first, everything else after. It is a lesson repeated every winter night. Without warmth, there is no supper. Without supper, there is no strength. Without strength, there is no tomorrow. Outside, snow continues to gather silently across the roof. The darkness has become complete. Inside the Longhouse, however, another part of the evening is only just beginning. The empty bowls are slowly stacked together. Wooden cups are refilled. Someone reaches for a beautifully carved lyre resting against one of the great timber posts. At the opposite end of the hall, Sigrid settles a little closer to the fire. The children notice the movement immediately. Their conversations fade. Leif crosses the room and curls up beside her bench, already knowing what is about to happen. The oldest stories are never told while people are busy eating. They belong to the hours after the meal, when the fire burns steadily, the wind sings beyond the walls, and an entire household gathers together beneath one roof. Tonight, one of those stories is about to begin. The last of the stew disappears slowly. No one hurries to clear the bowls. There is no clock urging anyone toward the next appointment. No distant bell marking the passing of another busy hour. Beyond the walls of the Longhouse, the winter night has settled completely over the valley. Whatever work remained unfinished outside will simply have to wait until morning. For now, the world has grown smaller. It stretches only as far as the warm circle of firelight. Astrid gathers the empty bowls one by one, stacking them carefully before carrying them to a wooden bucket of heated water. Even cleaning must be done thoughtfully. Water is precious during winter, and every bucket has been carried from a stream that now lies beneath a thick skin of ice. Nothing is wasted, not even the warmth left behind by the cooking fire. Eirik leans forward and gently nudges another piece of birch onto the glowing embers. The dry wood catches almost immediately, sending a shower of golden sparks upward. For a brief moment, every face in the hall flickers with dancing light before the flames settle once again into a steady glow. The old sheepdog circles twice beside the hearth before lowering himself onto the rush-covered floor with a satisfied sigh. Children instinctively drift closer to the warmth. Leif carries a small carved horse in one hand, its rough edges smoothed by his own careful work earlier that evening. He sits beside his grandmother without saying a word, resting his head lightly against her shoulder. He already knows what comes next. Winter evenings have their own rhythm. The meal is followed by quiet work. Quiet work is followed by stories. Outside, the wind may rule the land. Inside, memories rule the night. Sigrid reaches for the spindle lying beside her bench and begins twisting another length of wool between practiced fingers. The work continues almost without thought. She could likely spin thread even with her eyes closed, guided only by decades of habit. Around the hall, other hands remain busy as well. Bjorn sharpens the edge of a small knife with slow, even strokes across a whetstone. Astrid checks a length of woven cloth for loose threads before folding it neatly into a chest. Eirik carefully inspects a leather harness that will be needed once the snow begins to soften in spring. No one sits completely idle. Winter may offer fewer hours in the fields, but it offers countless opportunities to prepare for the season still to come. This surprises you. It is easy to imagine the Viking Age as a world divided neatly between dramatic adventures and long months of inactivity. Reality is quieter, more patient. A household survives because every season is used wisely. The fire crackles softly. Somewhere high above, smoke curls lazily toward the opening in the roof before disappearing into the cold darkness outside. Leif finally breaks the silence. "Grandmother," his voice is little more than a whisper. "Tell us about the fox." A smile touches the corners of Sigrid's face. "The fox?" she asks. "The clever one," Leif replies eagerly. "The one who fooled the hunter." Several adults exchange amused glances. Clearly this request has been made many times before. Sigrid adjusts the fur blanket around her shoulders before looking slowly around the room. Even Bjorn sets aside his sharpening stone. The hall grows almost perfectly still. Long before books filled shelves, long before schools gathered children into classrooms, knowledge lived in voices. A story could teach patience, warn against greed, explain the changing seasons, help children remember family ancestors, or simply make a long winter night feel a little shorter. For the Norse people, stories were never mere entertainment. They were memory itself. Some tales celebrated the gods. Others honored real men and women whose courage had become part of local tradition. Many were humorous, and a few were so old that no one could say exactly when they had first been told. Each generation borrowed them from the last, then carefully passed them forward. You realize something quietly remarkable. Had evenings like this never existed, much of what we know about the Viking world might have vanished forever. The great Icelandic sagas would not be written down for centuries. Before ink met parchment, stories survived because ordinary families gathered beside ordinary fires on ordinary winter nights. Outside, another gust of wind sweeps across the roof. Snow slides gently from the thatch with a muffled thump. No one even glances toward the sound. The Longhouse has weathered storms far worse than this one. Its thick timber walls have earned the family's trust. Sigrid begins speaking, her voice low and unhurried. Not loudly, there is no need. The hall itself seems to lean closer. Even the youngest children know that interrupting a storyteller is poor manners. Her tale is simple: a fox, a hunter, a frozen river. Yet as she speaks, the story grows into something larger. It is about cleverness overcoming strength, about patience triumphing over haste, about understanding the land rather than trying to conquer it. The lessons slip quietly into the listener's mind without ever announcing themselves. That is the power of a good story. It teaches while pretending only to entertain. You find yourself listening just as closely as the children, not because the tale is dramatic, but because the atmosphere makes every word feel important. The fire glows steadily. The snow continues to fall beyond the walls. The smell of pine smoke hangs softly in the air. For a little while, it becomes easy to forget that more than 1,000 years separate this evening from your own. People still gather around warmth, still tell stories, still laugh at familiar jokes, still search for comfort during long winter nights. Some things change remarkably little. As Sigrid's tale reaches its gentle conclusion, Leif smiles with quiet satisfaction. He already knows how it ends, but hearing a favorite story again is part of the comfort. Outside, the blizzard grows stronger. The wind no longer whistles, it hums, low and steady, like a distant voice moving through the forest. Eric glances briefly toward the heavy wooden door. Tomorrow's weather, he suspects, will make travel almost impossible. No one will be leaving the Longhouse at first light. The family will remain together, safe, warm, waiting for the storm to pass. And as another log settles into the glowing hearth, someone reaches toward the wooden lyre resting against the wall. The stories are over for now. For a little while, no one speaks. The quiet that settles over the Longhouse is not empty. It is comfortable. It is the kind of silence shared only by people who know one another well enough that conversation never feels necessary. The fire has burned lower now. Instead of tall dancing flames, glowing embers spread across the stone hearth like a small red constellation. Every few moments a pocket of trapped sap bursts inside one of the birch logs with a gentle pop, sending a shower of tiny sparks swirling upward into the smoke-darkened rafters. Outside, the blizzard has become impossible to ignore. The wind no longer arrives in sudden bursts. It blows steadily now, pressing against the timber walls with patient determination. Snow brushes softly across the roof. Somewhere beneath the drifts outside, the village paths are already beginning to disappear. By morning, they may be completely hidden. Yet inside the Longhouse, no one seems worried. Storms like this have visited every winter for generations. People respect them, they prepare for them, but they do not fear them in the way an unexpected disaster is feared. Winter is simply another guest that arrives every year. Eric reaches behind his bench and carefully lifts the wooden lyre resting against the wall. It is smaller than you imagined. Its polished maple frame catches the firelight as though it has been rubbed smooth by many years of careful hands. 6 horsehair strings stretch tightly across the instrument. Nothing about it appears extravagant. There are no jewels, no gold, no elaborate decoration. Only craftsmanship, only purpose. He settles the instrument comfortably against one knee. For several moments, he does absolutely nothing. He simply listens. You realize he is tuning the strings, not with a modern electronic device or tuning fork, but entirely by memory. One string is plucked. Its note lingers briefly beneath the roof. Another follows, slightly higher. Another, then another. The sound surprises you. It is softer than expected, gentler, almost fragile. You had imagined Viking music as loud, dramatic, and thunderous. Instead, it fills the room like warm light. No one applauds. No one announces that the performance is about to begin. Music belongs to the evening as naturally as the fire itself. The first melody is slow, simple, almost hypnotic. The notes rise and fall with an easy rhythm that seems to match the breathing of the people gathered around the hearth. Leif has already stopped carving his little wooden horse. The knife now rests forgotten across his lap. His eyes remain fixed on the glowing fire while the melody drifts through the hall. Even Skoll, the old sheepdog, lifts one ear briefly before settling back onto his paws. Perhaps music means little to him, or perhaps he has heard these same songs so often that they have become part of home itself. The hall begins to feel different. Not brighter, not warmer, only calmer. Astrid quietly resumes weaving while listening. The loom stands near one wall, its wooden frame rising almost to her shoulder. With practiced movements, she guides the shuttle through rows of tightly stretched wool threads. Back, forward, back again. Each movement creates a soft wooden click. Soon, you notice something remarkable. The weaving has found the rhythm of the music. The loom, the lyre, the fire, even the wind outside. Everything has fallen into a quiet harmony. This is how winter passes. Not through excitement, but through steady, familiar routines repeated night after night. You glance upward. Smoke continues to drift lazily beneath the roof beams before escaping through the opening above the hearth. The light catches tiny particles floating in the air. Ash, dust, wool fibers. The hall seems almost dreamlike now. Modern homes are often brightly illuminated, every corner visible, every shadow chased away. This longhouse accepts darkness. The far end of the building disappears into soft blackness. You can just make out hanging shields and bundles of drying herbs. Everything beyond that becomes mystery. It is easy to understand why stories of spirits and hidden beings found such fertile ground in places like this. The night leaves much to the imagination. Bjorn finally speaks. "Tomorrow," he says quietly. "The sled can wait." Eirik smiles. "I thought you'd say that." If this snow keeps falling, Bjorn nods toward the doorway. "The road will belong to the wolves." No one laughs. Not because the thought is frightening, because it is entirely possible. During particularly harsh winters, wolves sometimes ventured surprisingly close to settlements in search of easier prey. Attacks on people were uncommon. Livestock, much less so. Eirik makes a mental note. The animals will need checking before sunrise. If the storm eases at all. The music changes. The melody becomes slightly livelier now. Not enough to encourage dancing, only enough to lift weary spirits. Leif quietly taps one finger against his wooden bowl in perfect time. His little sister joins him. Soon both children are smiling without realizing it. Across the hall, Sigrid watches them with gentle satisfaction. She has lived long enough to understand something important. Children remember feelings more clearly than facts. Years from now, they may forget this particular melody. They may not remember what they ate tonight, but they will remember this feeling. Firelight, snow outside, family close together, safety. That memory will stay with them forever. You wonder how many evenings like this have passed inside these walls. Hundreds, perhaps thousands. The benches beneath you have supported generations. The carved support posts have witnessed births, celebrations, arguments, weddings, and final farewells. Every smoke stain above your head marks another forgotten evening, another ordinary night that quietly became history. Modern people often search history for extraordinary moments, great battles, powerful kings, famous discoveries. Yet most lives have always been built from evenings exactly like this one. Small conversations, music, work, rest. The ordinary is where history truly lives. Outside, the wind suddenly changes. A stronger gust strikes the western wall with surprising force. The heavy timbers answer with a deep groan. Snow tumbles from the roof in a muffled rush. Several children glance toward the doorway. Astrid notices immediately. "It is only the house talking," she says softly. "The old beams always complain when the wind changes." The children relax. You almost smile. Perhaps she believes it. Or perhaps every generation invents comforting explanations for sounds that might otherwise seem unsettling. Either way, it works. The music continues. The fire burns steadily. No one rushes to look outside. There is nothing to be gained from staring into darkness. Eventually, Eirik lowers the lyre onto his lap. The final note lingers in the smoky air for several long heartbeats before disappearing completely. Silence returns. But it feels different now. Full, content, satisfied. Leif lets out a slow yawn. Another child follows. One by one, the younger members of the household begin rubbing tired eyes. The longest part of the night still lies ahead. Soon the benches will become beds. The blankets will be unrolled, the embers carefully arranged to last until morning. Outside, the blizzard continues to gather strength beneath the stars. Inside, the Longhouse prepares for sleep. And with the coming darkness, an entirely different side of Viking life is about to reveal itself. The final note of the lyre fades so gently that for a moment you are not entirely sure it has ended. The Longhouse falls quiet once more. Not silent, never completely silent. The fire continues its soft conversation with the dry birch logs, sending an occasional crack through the warm hall. Somewhere behind you, Skoll lets out a sleepy sigh before settling deeper into the rushes beside the hearth. The rhythmic click of Astrid's loom has stopped, replaced now by the quieter sound of wool blankets being folded and wooden cups stacked neatly together. The evening has reached that peaceful hour when the busiest work is finished. But sleep has not yet arrived. Eirik slowly rises from his bench. He stretches his shoulders with the careful movements of a man who has spent decades splitting wood, rowing boats, and working frozen fields. The joints in his knees protest quietly before yielding. Without saying much, he reaches for his heavy wool cloak hanging from a peg near the entrance. You notice him pick up a small oil lantern. Its flame is no larger than the tip of your thumb, yet it glows warmly behind thin sheets of polished horn that protect it from the wind. Astrid glances toward him. You'll be back before the fire settles. He nods. Only a short walk. She smiles faintly. Take care, the wind has changed. No dramatic farewell follows. No one appears concerned. Checking the animals before bed is simply another part of winter. Seeing your curiosity, Eirik gestures toward the door. You pull your own cloak tightly around your shoulders and follow. The heavy timber door groans as it swings open. Immediately the warmth disappears. A sharp breath of icy air rushes into the hall, swirling wood smoke around the entrance before escaping into the darkness beyond. Several children instinctively pull their blankets closer. The fire answers with a brief flicker. Then the door closes behind you. Winter greets you without hesitation. The cold is startling after the comfort of the hearth. It slips beneath your cloak, finding every place where wool overlaps just a little imperfectly. Each breath hangs before your face as a pale cloud that drifts upward into the moonlit night. For a few moments neither of you speaks. There is no need. The village itself seems to be asleep. Fresh snow muffles every sound beneath your boots. The narrow paths that connected each building only hours earlier have already softened beneath a new white blanket. The world feels strangely untouched. You glance upward. The sky is breathtaking. Without cities, factories, or electric lights, the heavens reveal themselves with astonishing clarity. Thousands upon thousands of stars stretch from one horizon to the other. The Milky Way forms a pale river across the darkness. To the people who live here, these stars are more than beautiful. They are companions, markers of seasons, stories written across the sky. Long before compasses became common in Northern Europe, experienced sailors learned to trust familiar constellations when crossing open water. The same stars that watched over great voyages also watched over quiet villages like this one. A faint ribbon of green light begins to shimmer low above the northern horizon. At first, you wonder whether your eyes are playing tricks. Then it grows brighter. Gentle curtains of pale emerald drift silently across the heavens before slowly fading again. Today, we call this phenomenon the Aurora Borealis. To the people standing beside you, it is simply another mystery of the northern sky. Many believed such lights carried meaning. Some thought they were reflections from the armor of the gods. Others imagined spirits moving across the heavens. No single explanation existed, only wonder. Eirik notices your gaze. He smiles without speaking. Some things are better admired than explained. The lantern casts a small circle of golden light as you continue through the village. The Longhouse remains the largest building, but several smaller structures stand nearby. Storehouses raised above the ground on stout wooden posts protect precious grain from dampness and hungry mice. A smithy sits dark and quiet now, its forge cold until morning. Nearby stands a simple workshop where wood, leather, and bone become tools through patient craftsmanship. Every building has its purpose. Every structure exists because someone in the community depends upon it. Winter has a way of revealing what truly matters. The wind carries a different sound now, a low, gentle snort, then another. You have reached the byre. The animals sense your approach before you can see them clearly. Inside the timber shelter, warmth gathers in thick pockets beneath the roof. Several sheep lie close together, their heavy wool coats already dusted with bits of straw. A pair of goats lift their heads briefly before returning to their quiet chewing. Toward the back stands a sturdy milk cow, shifting her weight lazily from one hoof to the other. The air smells entirely different here. Hay, earth, warm breath, leather harnesses. To modern visitors, it might seem unusual that livestock are housed so close to people. For Viking families, however, animals represented survival itself. They provided milk through much of the year, wool for clothing, leather for shoes, bone for tools. Even their body heat helped make winter a little more bearable. A household without healthy animals faced a far more uncertain spring. Eric gently runs one hand along the cow's neck. She responds with little more than a slow blink. Clearly, this routine is familiar. He checks the wooden latch securing the door, tests the roof for drifting snow, looks once toward the wood piles stacked nearby. Everything appears exactly as it should, prepared, orderly, ready for another night. You realize something quietly remarkable. No one here survives through strength alone. Winter favors those who notice small problems before they become large ones. A loose hinge, a cracked bucket, a gap beneath a door, an untied animal. History often celebrates dramatic victories. Life, however, is usually preserved by ordinary habits repeated every single day. As you leave the shelter, the wind rises once more. This time it carries something distant, a long, haunting cry. You stop instinctively. The sound floats across the frozen valley, before fading into the forest beyond. Another answers. Then silence. Wolves. They are far away, much farther than the stories often suggest. Yet hearing them reminds you that the wilderness surrounding this small village remains vast. The Longhouse is not merely comfortable. It is a refuge, a tiny island of warmth, surrounded by forests, mountains, and winter that care nothing for human plans. Eric listens for another moment before continuing toward home. He does not hurry. He simply walks. He has heard wolves before. His father heard them. His grandfather likely did as well. Some sounds belong to every generation. As the Longhouse comes into view again, its roof glows softly beneath the moonlight. Golden firelight spills through narrow gaps in the timber walls, painting warm stripes across the untouched snow. From outside, the building appears almost alive. You understand now why people speak of returning home, rather than merely returning indoors. Home is not simply shelter. It is light in darkness, warmth against winter, voices against silence. You brush the snow from your boots before reaching the doorway. Eric lifts the heavy latch. The great wooden door opens. Immediately the familiar warmth embraces you once more. The scent of smoke, fresh bread, and burning birch fills the air. Children have begun rubbing sleepy eyes. Blankets are being spread across the benches. Astrid is carefully arranging the glowing embers so they will burn steadily through the longest hours of the night. Outside, winter still rules the valley. Inside, the Longhouse prepares for sleep. And as the fire settles into a deep orange glow, another chapter of the night quietly begins. The heavy door closes behind you with a deep, reassuring thud. Almost immediately, the roar of the wind fades into a distant murmur. The warmth greets you once again. Not suddenly, but gradually, as though the Longhouse itself is welcoming you back. Your cheeks still sting from the cold outside. Tiny crystals of snow cling stubbornly to the shoulders of your cloak, before quietly melting into dark patches of damp wool. Astrid notices. Without saying a word, she gestures toward a sturdy wooden peg driven into one of the great support posts. Several cloaks already hang there. Heavy wool, sheepskin, thick leather, each one slowly drying in the gentle heat rising from the central hearth. Nothing is ever placed too close to the fire. Every family knows the danger. A single careless spark could destroy an entire year's work in only a few terrible moments. Fire gives life. Fire can also take it away. The children have become noticeably quieter. Even Leaf, whose endless curiosity filled the evening with questions, now struggles to hide frequent yawns. His little wooden horse lies forgotten beneath the bench where it slipped from his hand. Skull discovers it first. The old dog nudges the toy gently with his nose before deciding it is neither food nor particularly interesting. He circles the fire once, then settles into his familiar place where generations of dogs have likely slept before him. The great hall has begun to transform. Only an hour ago it was a dining room, a workshop, a place for music and stories. Now it slowly becomes something entirely different. A bedroom. but not the kind you know. There are no separate rooms, no doors to close, no private spaces hidden behind walls. Instead, the long wooden benches lining both sides of the hall reveal their second purpose. During daylight, they serve as places to sit, work, and eat. Tonight, they become beds. Astrid and Sigrid begin unrolling thick mattresses stuffed with dried straw and soft moss gathered during the previous summer. The mattresses are surprisingly practical. Straw traps warmth while allowing moisture to escape. When it eventually becomes worn or damp, the filling can simply be replaced. Fresh rushes scattered across the floor release a faint grassy scent as people walk across them. You kneel beside one of the sleeping places. It is simpler than a modern bed, yet it is far more comfortable than you expected. A thick sheepskin is spread across the mattress. Another lies folded nearby to serve as a blanket. Additional wool coverings wait inside a cedar chest for the coldest nights. Comfort has never depended entirely upon luxury. Sometimes, it depends upon knowing exactly which materials nature provides. You notice something else. Children naturally settle beside parents. Grandparents remain only a few arms lengths away. Guests are welcomed into the same shared space. Privacy, at least in the modern sense, is almost unknown. Instead, warmth is shared. Body heat becomes another precious resource. It is one of countless small advantages that help a family survive months of freezing temperatures. The fire crackles gently. Eirik walks toward the hearth carrying a thick split log beneath one arm. Rather than placing it directly onto the flames, he pauses. This log is different, larger, denser. He carefully lays it across a bed of glowing embers before covering part of it with white ash using an iron fire rake. You watch with quiet curiosity. He notices. "This one is for the night," he says. His words are simple, yet they reveal centuries of experience. A large hardwood log, buried partially beneath hot ash, burns remarkably slowly. Instead of producing tall flames, it releases steady heat for many hours. By morning, glowing embers will still remain beneath the ash, ready to awaken with fresh kindling. Starting a completely new fire in the middle of winter was never impossible, but it was unnecessary work when careful planning could preserve one throughout the night. Many Viking households guarded their fire almost as carefully as their food stores. You find yourself staring into the glowing embers. Modern homes hide their heating systems behind walls. Here, warmth has a visible heartbeat. Every glowing coal matters. Across the room, Bjorn reaches upward toward the smoke-darkened rafters. Long strips of smoked lamb hang from wooden poles above the fire, gently preserved by weeks of warm smoke. Beside them hang bundles of onions, garlic, dry herbs, even fishing nets suspended safely away from curious mice. The ceiling itself has become part of the household. Every empty space serves a purpose. Nothing is decorative simply for decoration. Everything earns its place. Outside, the wind suddenly whistles through the smoke hole above. The fire responds by dancing brighter for a few moments before settling again. The shadows upon the walls begin moving, long, slow, almost alive. Leif notices them immediately. They're dancing again. Sigrid smiles. They always dance when the wind tells stories. The little boy nods, as though this explanation answers every question. Perhaps, in its own way, it does. You realize something fascinating. Children growing up here would spend countless winter nights watching these shifting shadows. It is easy to understand why imagination flourished, why legends of hidden beings living beneath mountains or spirits wandering snowy forests became part of everyday life. Darkness never feels completely empty. The human mind naturally fills it with stories. Astrid finishes laying the final blankets across one of the benches. She quietly shakes a feather pillow before placing it near the head of the bed. Feather pillows are precious. Not every household owns many. Each one represents years of patiently collecting feathers from geese and ducks. Small comforts often require enormous patience. Outside, another gust rattles the heavy wooden door. Inside, no one seems hurried. Preparing for sleep is not a race, it is another evening ritual. Children wash their hands in a small wooden basin. Boots are brushed free of packed snow before being placed near the hearth to dry. Belts holding knives and small tools are carefully removed and hung upon pegs. Nothing is simply tossed aside. Order now makes tomorrow easier. You begin to notice how deeply preparation shapes every part of Viking life. Food, fire, clothing, tools, even sleep. Everything depends upon thinking ahead. It is perhaps the greatest lesson hidden within this longhouse. Strength certainly matters. Courage matters too. But survival belongs most often to those who prepare before danger arrives. The fire glows lower. Conversation fades. One by one, small oil lamps are extinguished until only the great hearth remains. Its orange light washes gently across sleeping benches, carved wooden pillars, and smoke-blackened beams overhead. Beyond the walls, the blizzard continues across the valley without pause. Inside, the household settles beneath layers of wool and fur. The longest hours of the night have finally arrived, and with them come the quiet sounds that only those awake in the darkness ever truly notice. Little by little, the longhouse surrenders to sleep, not all at once. There is no single moment when everyone closes their eyes together. Instead, the hall grows quieter by degrees, as though the night itself is gently asking each person to rest. The youngest children are the first to disappear beneath thick wool blankets. Leif murmurs something unintelligible before rolling onto one side, still clutching the little carved horse he had nearly forgotten earlier. His sister nestles against their mother, already breathing with the slow, steady rhythm of deep sleep. Astrid reaches across and carefully tucks another fold of sheepskin over them. She checks almost without thinking that no small hand has slipped outside the warmth. Only then does she settle onto her own bedding. Across the hall, Bjorn stretches one last time. His shoulders ache pleasantly from a day spent shaping timber and repairing tools. He rubs his rough hands together, examining the tiny cuts left by fresh wood shavings before blowing gently across his fingertips. Tomorrow those same hands will work again, if the weather allows. If not, there will always be something needing repair inside the longhouse. Winter has a way of revealing every weakness. A loose hinge, a cracked bucket, a fraying rope, a dull axe. Nothing escapes notice for long. Eirik remains awake, not because he cannot sleep, because every household has habits formed over generations. He kneels beside the hearth one final time. Using the iron poker, he carefully draws several glowing embers together into a compact mound before laying another split log across them. Not too close, not too far, just enough that the wood will slowly catch over the coming hours. He scatters a thin layer of ash across one side. The flames shrink. The glow remains. This is not merely tending a fire. It is preserving tomorrow morning. Only after he is satisfied does he rise and quietly make his way toward his own bed. The hall is nearly dark now. The bright flames that welcomed you earlier in the evening have become a soft orange glow. Their light reaches only partway across the room. Beyond that, darkness patiently waits. Your own blanket feels surprisingly heavy. Its coarse wool scratches faintly against your hands, yet the weight is comforting. Beneath you, the straw mattress shifts softly each time you move. It is nothing like a modern bed, and yet, after the long walk through snow and the warmth of the evening fire, it feels more inviting than you expected. You lie still, for the first time since entering the longhouse. You simply listen. The sounds are subtle, so subtle that someone accustomed to modern life might overlook them entirely. A log settles deep within the hearth with a muted crack. Tiny embers roll across the stones. Somewhere high above, smoke continues its slow journey toward the opening in the roof. You hear the faint rustle of wool as someone turns over in their sleep. A child sighs. Skoll lets out a sleepy huff before stretching one paw toward the fading warmth of the fire. Outside, the wind speaks in a language all its own. Sometimes it whistles sharply around the corners of the roof. Sometimes it hums through the gaps between stacked logs. Sometimes it disappears altogether, leaving a silence so complete that you begin listening for it to return. Snow brushes gently across the turf roof overhead. Soft, almost like distant rain, except colder, much colder. You begin to understand something. The Longhouse is never truly silent. It is alive. Little by little, the Longhouse surrenders to sleep. Not all at once. There is no single moment when everyone closes their eyes together. Instead, the hall grows quieter by degrees, as though the night itself is gently asking each person to rest. The youngest children are the first to disappear beneath thick wool blankets. Leif murmurs something unintelligible before rolling onto one side, still clutching the little carved horse he had nearly forgotten earlier. His sister nestles against their mother, already breathing with the slow, steady rhythm of deep sleep. Astrid reaches across and carefully tucks another fold of sheepskin over them. She checks almost without thinking that no small hand has slipped outside the warmth. Only then does she settle onto her own bedding. Across the hall, Bjorn stretches one last time. His shoulders ache pleasantly from a day spent shaping timber and repairing tools. He rubs his rough hands together, examining the tiny cuts left by fresh wood shavings before blowing gently across his fingertips. Tomorrow, those same hands will work again, if the weather allows. If not, there will always be something needing repair inside the Longhouse. Winter has a way of revealing every weakness. A loose hinge, a cracked bucket, a fraying rope, a dull axe. Nothing escapes notice for long. Eirik remains awake, not because he cannot sleep, because every household has habits formed over generations. He kneels beside the hearth one final time. Using the iron poker, he carefully draws several glowing embers together into a compact mound before laying another split log across them. Not too close, not too far, just enough that the wood will slowly catch over the coming hours. He scatters a thin layer of ash across one side. The flames shrink, the glow remains. This is not merely tending a fire, it is preserving tomorrow morning. Only after he is satisfied does he rise and quietly make his way toward his own bed. The hall is nearly dark now. The bright flames that welcomed you earlier in the evening have become a soft orange glow. Their light reaches only partway across the room. Beyond that, darkness patiently waits. Your own blanket feels surprisingly heavy. Its coarse wool scratches faintly against your hands, yet the weight is comforting. Beneath you, the straw mattress shifts softly each time you move. It is nothing like a modern bed, and yet, after the long walk through snow and the warmth of the evening fire, it feels more inviting than you expected. You lie still. For the first time since entering the Longhouse, you simply listen. The sounds are subtle, so subtle that someone accustomed to modern life might overlook them entirely. A log settles deep within the hearth with a muted crack. Tiny embers roll across the stones. Somewhere high above, smoke continues its slow journey toward the opening in the roof. You hear the faint rustle of wool as someone turns over in their sleep. A child sighs. Skull lets out a sleepy huff before stretching one paw toward the fading warmth of the fire. Outside, the wind speaks in a language all its own. Sometimes it whistles sharply around the corners of the roof. Sometimes it hums through the gaps between stacked logs. Sometimes it disappears altogether, leaving a silence so complete that you begin listening for it to return. Snow brushes gently across the turf roof overhead. Soft, almost like distant rain, except colder, much colder. You begin to understand something. The Longhouse is never truly silent. It is alive. Every beam expands and contracts with the changing temperature. Every leather strap hanging from the walls sways ever so slightly in unseen drafts. The fire breathes, the roof breathes. Even the earth beneath the packed floor seems to hold the memory of countless winters. To the people sleeping around you, these sounds require no explanation. They have heard them since infancy. Children who grow up here quickly learn the difference between ordinary noises and those demanding attention. The gentle creak of timber, perfectly normal. A loose shutter banging in the wind, worth checking at sunrise. A frightened horse, that might wake the entire household. Knowledge often begins with listening. Your thoughts drift toward the darkness outside. Only a few inches of timber separate this warm hall from a frozen world. Beyond the village lie endless forests of spruce and pine, their branches bending beneath fresh snow. Frozen streams wind silently between rocky hills. Hidden valleys sleep beneath white blankets untouched by human footprints. For hours, perhaps days, no one will pass through them. Winter belongs to itself. The realization is strangely calming. Modern life is rarely quiet. Even in the middle of the night, there are engines, distant traffic, electrical hums, glowing screens, and countless reminders that the world never truly sleeps. Here, darkness still belongs to darkness. The stars shine because nothing competes with them. The wind can be heard because nothing drowns it out. You wonder what time it might be. Then you smile. No one here knows, or needs to know. There are no clocks hanging upon the walls, no glowing numbers marking every passing minute. Night is measured differently, by the height of the moon, by the slow fading of the fire, by the changing sound of the wind, by the first call of birds before dawn. Time feels softer, less demanding. Perhaps that is why the hours seem longer, not because they actually are, but because no one is counting them. A faint scent of pine resin drifts from one of the support beams warming beside the hearth. The smell mixes with lingering smoke, wool, and drying herbs suspended from the rafters. It is a fragrance impossible to recreate perfectly today. Every longhouse possessed its own unique scent, shaped by the timber used to build it, the meals prepared within it, and the generations who called it home. If walls could remember, these would remember everything. Births, harvest feasts, quiet arguments, long winters, children growing into parents, parents becoming grandparents. The hall itself has become a silent witness to human life. Another gust pushes against the western wall. This time, something else follows, very faint, almost too distant to notice. A single howl, long, low, carried across the frozen valley. Then another, not close enough to threaten the village, only close enough to remind everyone that beyond the circle of firelight, another world continues through the night. A world of wolves following old trails through deep snow, foxes searching beneath frozen drifts, owls gliding silently between dark trees. Life does not pause because humans sleep. It simply follows different paths until morning. The howl fades. No one inside the longhouse wakes. Either they have grown accustomed to such sounds, or they trust the strength of these walls. Perhaps both. Your eyes grow heavier. The fire has become little more than glowing embers now. Their light flickers softly against the carved wooden pillars before slowly fading again. The last thing you notice before sleep begins to claim you is the remarkable feeling of security. Not because danger does not exist. Danger is everywhere beyond these walls. But because generations of careful preparation have created a place where families can close their eyes despite the winter outside. That, more than swords, more than ships, more than famous battles, may be the greatest achievement of all. The longhouse sleeps, the storm continues, and somewhere beyond the drifting snow, the first unseen hours of a new day quietly begin their slow approach. Sometime during the deepest hours of the night, you awaken. Not fully, not with the sudden alertness that follows an unexpected noise. Instead, your eyes open slowly, as though the darkness itself has gently called you back for just a moment. For several heartbeats, you remain perfectly still. You cannot immediately remember where you are. The ceiling above is little more than a web of dark timber, disappearing into shadow. The familiar scent of smoke and warm wood fills the air. Then, the memory returns. The longhouse, the winter storm, the family sleeping only a few steps away. Nothing has changed, and yet everything feels different. The lively hall that welcomed you earlier has become a world of whispers. The great fire, once bright enough to illuminate every face around it, now glows quietly beneath a blanket of pale ash. Thin ribbons of orange pulse deep within the embers, breathing so gently that they almost seem alive. The light they cast is soft enough that the carved posts appear to emerge from darkness only when the glow briefly brightens. The shadows move more slowly now, almost lazily. Your ears gradually begin to notice sounds that daylight would never allow. Someone breathes deeply in sleep. Another person turns over, causing a wool blanket to rustle for only a second before stillness returns. A log shifts almost imperceptibly, releasing a tiny shower of glowing sparks beneath its layer of ash. Somewhere above, a single droplet of melted snow falls from the smoke hole onto a worn stone near the hearth. It hisses softly, then disappears. The hall is alive with quiet things. You begin to understand why people who lived before the modern world became such careful listeners. Silence was never truly empty. It carried information, the strength of the wind, the health of the animals, the condition of the fire, the changing weather. Even now, lying beneath your blanket, you can tell that the storm has changed again. Earlier, it rushed angrily across the roof. Now, its voice has softened. Instead of violent gusts, snow falls in thick, steady layers that muffle almost every sound from outside. The world beyond the walls has become quieter than before. A movement catches your eye. Across the hall, Eirik is awake, not fully dressed, not preparing for work. He simply sits on the edge of his bedding for a moment, listening. His expression is calm. There is no alarm, only habit. Without disturbing anyone else, he rises and walks barefoot across the packed earth floor. His steps are surprisingly quiet. Years of living inside the same hall have taught him exactly which floorboards creak and which remain silent. He kneels beside the hearth. For a long moment he does nothing. He simply watches the embers. Then, with the iron poker resting nearby, he gently stirs the ash. Tiny points of orange brighten beneath the grey surface, like stars appearing behind clouds. Satisfied, he places one small piece of dry birch across the hottest coals. Not a great log, not enough to flood the hall with light, just enough to feed the fire until morning. The thin wood catches slowly. Its flame is no larger than a candle. Yet within minutes, the warmth spreading from the hearth begins growing stronger again. You realize how little fuel is actually needed when a fire has been carefully tended all evening. Starting from cold would require far more effort. Preserving life is easier than creating it anew. The lesson reaches beyond the hearth itself. Eirik remains kneeling for another moment. He stretches his hands toward the warmth, rubbing feeling back into fingers chilled by the night air that always lingers near the floor. Then he quietly replaces the poker. Before returning to bed, he glances once toward the doorway. Not because he expects danger, simply because responsible people look. The heavy timber latch remains secure. Snow has drifted against the lower edge of the door, sealing tiny gaps where cold air might otherwise creep inside. The house itself seems determined to protect those sleeping within it. Outside, the forest waits beneath its white blanket. Inside, the family sleeps on. You wonder how many times Eirik has repeated this same quiet ritual. Hundreds, perhaps thousands. One winter, blending gently into the next. His father may have done the same. His grandfather before him. Many of history's most important traditions were never written down. They survived because someone woke in the middle of the night to tend a fire. The embers brighten again. The faint warmth reaches your face. It reminds you that every ordinary task inside this longhouse carries extraordinary importance. Keeping the fire alive, repairing a worn cloak, sharpening a dull knife, stacking dry wood before snow arrives. None of these deeds will ever appear in a saga. No skald will sing songs about them. Yet without such quiet work, there would be no families left to remember the heroes. The thought lingers pleasantly in your mind. Beyond the smoke hole, a break appears in the clouds. For only a few moments, moonlight slips into the hall, pale and silver, touching the upper beams, before fading again as fresh snow drifts across the opening. The contrast between moonlight and firelight is striking. One is cold, distant, almost untouched. The other is warm, familiar, entirely human. Together they fill the hall with shifting shades of amber and blue. What is a beautiful sight, one few people in the modern world ever experience. Gradually your own breathing slows. The warmth beneath your blanket spreads through tired muscles. The sounds of the hall become softer still. The crackle of the fire, the steady breathing of the family, the gentle sigh of wind beyond the walls. One by one, they blend together until it becomes impossible to separate one from another. This is the true rhythm of the Longhouse. Not excitement, not adventure, but quiet endurance. Outside, somewhere beyond the sleeping village, a fox crosses the fresh snow. An owl glides silently between dark spruce trees. The river remains frozen beneath its thick shell of ice. The stars continue their slow journey across the northern sky. The world never truly stops. It simply moves more gently during the night. Your eyelids become heavy once more. The brief waking has passed. The fire is secure. The household is safe. There is nothing more that requires your attention. You pull the wool blanket a little higher around your shoulders. The smell of smoke, pine, and warm timber surrounds you like another layer of comfort. Your eyes close. Sleep returns as quietly as it left. And somewhere beyond the eastern hills, although no one inside the Longhouse can yet see it, the first faint promise of dawn has already begun its slow journey toward the valley. Sleep returns gently. The warmth beneath your blanket has driven away the last traces of the bitter cold that clung to you when you first entered the Longhouse hours ago. Your breathing slows until it matches the quiet rhythm of everyone around you. The storm no longer dominates the night. Instead, it has become part of it. Snow continues to fall beyond the timber walls, but its voice has softened into little more than a whisper. Every so often, a light drift slips from the roof and lands outside with a muffled sigh, adding another layer to the white blanket covering the village. Inside, the fire continues its patient work. The embers glow beneath their covering of ash, releasing a slow, steady warmth that spreads across the packed earth floor before rising gently through the hall. Shadows drift lazily across the carved support posts, changing shape almost so slowly that you only notice when you happen to glance back a few moments later. The darkness here is unlike modern darkness. Today, when night falls, we often banish it immediately with electric light. We decide exactly how bright our homes will be. A Viking family had no such luxury. Darkness was accepted. It became another member of the household. The fire illuminated only what truly mattered. Everything else remained hidden beyond the edge of its glow. As your eyes adjust, the hall seems almost transformed. The carved dragon head near the entrance appears alive for just an instant before the shifting firelight reveals it to be nothing more than weathered oak. A hanging cloak sways gently in an unseen draught, briefly resembling the silhouette of a standing figure. Bundles of drying herbs cast delicate shadows that stretch across the walls like tangled branches. You begin to understand why people who lived in places like this often spoke of unseen worlds existing alongside their own, not because they lacked imagination, but because imagination was constantly invited. The night offered few clear answers. It asked quiet questions instead. For the Norse people, the world was filled with stories that helped explain what could not easily be understood. Some believed that dreams could sometimes carry meaning. A particularly vivid dream might be remembered over breakfast and discussed with family members, not as a certainty, but as something worth thinking about. A dream of calm seas before a voyage could bring confidence. A troubling dream before a difficult journey might encourage extra caution. Not everyone believed dreams carried messages. Even then, people held different opinions. But dreams were rarely dismissed as meaningless. They belonged to the mysterious hours when the ordinary world seemed a little less solid. The same was true of the long winter night itself. Beyond the walls of the Longhouse stretched forests that few people would willingly cross after sunset. Not because they expected monsters behind every tree, but because darkness concealed dangers that daylight revealed. A hidden stream beneath fresh snow, a fallen branch waiting beneath drifting powder, a hungry wolf moving silently between the pines. Practical caution and old belief often walked side by side. You shift slightly beneath the blanket. The wool has become pleasantly warm. Its familiar scent mixes with smoke that has settled into every thread over countless evenings beside the hearth. Modern clothing is washed until almost scentless. These garments carry memories, smoke from last winter, the smell of sheep from autumn shearing, pine resin gathered while repairing the roof. Every cloak tells its own quiet history. Across the hall, Someone murmurs softly in sleep. Perhaps it is Leif, perhaps another child, dreaming of tomorrow's snowfall. Astrid stirs only briefly, before settling once again. Even in sleep, mothers often remain lightly aware of the sounds around them. It is a habit, older than memory itself. The embers pulse brighter for a moment. Their warmth reaches your face. You find yourself wondering what stories filled the dreams of the people sleeping beside you. Did Eirik dream of the sea he had crossed in younger years? Did Astrid remember summers when the fields stretched green beneath endless daylight? Would little Leif dream of becoming a skilled boat builder, a trader, or perhaps simply of racing through fresh snow with Skoll bounding beside him? History rarely preserves such thoughts. Stone remembers kings, metal remembers battles. Dreams leave almost no trace. Yet dreams were surely as real to the people who dreamed them as our own are to us. It is one of history's quietest mysteries. We know what tools they used, what houses they built, what animals they raised. We even know many of the stories they told. But the private landscape inside another person's mind, that has always remained just beyond our reach. Outside, the clouds begin to thin, only slightly. A narrow beam of moonlight slips through the smoke hole, high above the hearth. It falls across the packed earth floor in a pale silver line before disappearing again as another cloud drifts across the sky. The entire moment lasts only a heartbeat. Yet it transforms the hall. Orange firelight and cool moonlight briefly meet in the center of the room, bathing the sleeping household in two different colors at once: warmth and winter, home and the endless world beyond it. You notice how carefully the house has been positioned. Its entrance faces away from the strongest winter winds. The thick turf covering the roof helps trap precious warmth inside. The timber walls, cut and fitted with patient craftsmanship, have already endured many seasons like this one. Good building was never a matter of comfort alone. It was survival. A poorly built house might stand through summer. Winter would reveal every mistake. The fire settles lower once more. Tiny red embers glow beneath soft white ash, like jewels hidden beneath fresh snow. You understand now why families guarded them so carefully. Without those glowing coals, morning would begin with cold hands, frozen kindling, and precious time spent struggling to create new flames. Keeping the fire alive overnight was one of countless invisible tasks that made the next day possible. So much of history depends upon work no one notices. The bread baked before anyone wakes, the water carried before anyone asks, the fire tended while everyone else sleeps. These quiet acts rarely appear in heroic poems. Yet civilizations are built upon them. A gentle sigh escapes the roof as the wind changes once more. This time, something different follows. Silence. Not complete silence. Rather, the silence that arrives when a storm has almost spent itself. The Longhouse seems to notice. The timbers no longer groan beneath powerful gusts. Snow no longer rattles against the walls. Even Skoll lifts his head briefly, ears twitching toward the doorway before deciding everything is as it should be. He settles again with a contented grunt. Beyond the eastern hills, still hidden by darkness, the earth continues its slow turning. Morning is coming. Not quickly, not yet, but inevitably. The longest part of the night has passed. You close your eyes once more. The smoke, the warmth, the gentle breathing of the sleeping household, the faint scent of pine and wool, they all blend together until it becomes impossible to separate one from another. The Longhouse holds its people safely through another winter night. And somewhere beyond the snow-covered forests, though no one inside can yet see it, the first hint of dawn has already begun to color the edge of the world. If someone were to ask you which part of a winter night is the coldest, you might naturally answer, midnight. It seems like the obvious choice. The sun has long since disappeared. Darkness has settled over the land, and every surface has been losing warmth for hours. Yet here, in a Viking village more than 1,000 years ago, experience teaches something different. The deepest cold almost always arrives just before dawn, long after the excitement of the storm has faded. Long after everyone has fallen asleep. The earth has spent the entire night giving away its warmth to the clear northern sky, and there is nothing left to replace it until the first rays of morning finally climb above the horizon. You do not notice the change immediately. Instead, you feel it. A tiny pocket of cool air brushes across your face. It slips quietly beneath the edge of your blanket before disappearing again. The fire still glows faithfully in the center of the hall, but its warmth no longer reaches quite as far as it did earlier in the evening. The Longhouse seems to draw in upon itself. Families instinctively shift closer together. Without fully waking, a child curls more tightly against a parent. Someone pulls another fold of wool over chilled shoulders. Even Skull, stretched comfortably beside the hearth only an hour earlier, rises with a sleepy groan and circles twice before settling closer to the fading embers. Animals understand warmth just as well as people, perhaps even better. The hall remains almost completely dark. Only the fire offers enough light to reveal the rough grain of nearby timbers. Beyond that small circle of orange, everything dissolves into gentle shadow. The storm has finally passed. Its silence feels almost startling after hours of wind. Fresh snow now blankets the village so completely that even familiar shapes appear softened. Roofs seem rounder, fence posts resemble small white pillars. Wood piles have become gentle hills beneath untouched drifts. The world has been remade while everyone slept. Inside the Longhouse, Eirik opens his eyes once more. Not because he has heard anything unusual, not because danger threatens, simply because years of winter have quietly trained his body to wake before sunrise. There is no alarm clock, no church bell, no mechanical reminder waiting to announce the hour. His body has become the clock. He remains lying still for several moments, listening. This is something nearly every experienced farmer learns. Before stepping outside, before beginning the day's work, before even adding another log to the fire, he listens. The house itself tells him many things. The wind has disappeared. The timber are no longer groaning beneath heavy gusts. Snow is no longer striking the walls. The silence itself carries information. He smiles faintly. The worst of the weather has passed. So, as not to disturb anyone, he sits upright. His bare feet touch the packed earth floor. Even through the layer of rushes scattered across it, the ground feels cold. Not painfully so, simply honest. He wraps a heavy wool cloak around his shoulders before crossing to the hearth. The embers have done exactly what he hoped they would. Beneath their blanket of pale ash, a deep orange glow still survives. Patient, steady, alive. Many people today imagine that ancient fires constantly blazed with towering flames throughout the night. In reality, such fires would consume enormous amounts of valuable wood. Experienced households preferred a different approach. They allowed the flames to settle into slow-burning embers that preserved heat while using surprisingly little fuel. He reaches for the iron poker resting beside the hearth. With slow, practiced movements, he brushes away a little ash. Immediately, brighter coals appear beneath the surface. The fire had never truly gone to sleep. It had simply been waiting. He lays several thin pieces of dry kindling across the hottest embers. Then he waits. There is no rushing of fire. Within moments, the smallest twigs begin to darken. A thread of pale smoke curls upward. Another heartbeat passes. A tiny yellow flame appears. It trembles uncertainly, then another joins it. Soon the quiet heart of the fire begins beating strongly once again. Fresh warmth spreads slowly through the hall. Not enough to wake sleeping children, just enough to greet the coming morning. You watch the transformation with quiet fascination. It feels strangely symbolic. Morning itself begins almost the same way, not with brilliant sunlight, with a single small change. Then another, then another. Outside, the eastern horizon remains hidden beyond thick forests and distant hills, yet the stars have already begun to shift. Throughout countless generations, people living in northern Scandinavia learned to recognize the night sky almost as intimately as their own fields. Certain stars appeared in familiar places before dawn. Others slowly faded toward the western horizon, without clocks, without calendars hanging upon walls. The heavens themselves became faithful companions. Even during long winters, they offered quiet reassurance that time continued moving forward. You glance upward toward the smoke hole. Only a handful of stars remain visible through the narrow opening. The brightest among them shimmer with extraordinary clarity in the freezing air. How many Viking sailors looked upon those same stars before steering their ships across unknown seas? How many children lying exactly where you now rest wondered whether the lights above were fires burning in another world? Some questions have no final answer. That may be part of their beauty. A faint stirring comes from the far end of the hall. Bjorn turns over, blinking slowly before realizing the fire has begun to brighten again. He offers Eirik a sleepy nod. No words are exchanged. None are necessary. Some mornings begin with conversation. Others begin with quiet understanding. The old sheepdog stretches his front legs one at a time before wandering toward the doorway. He sniffs the cool air drifting beneath it. Then, apparently satisfied that no unexpected visitors have arrived during the night, he returns to the hearth. His duties, too, continue without ceremony. The smell inside the longhouse has changed almost imperceptibly. The fresh kindling releases the sweet scent of newly split birch. As the flames strengthen, the fragrance mingles with lingering smoke, wool, and drying herbs. Morning has its own aroma. Different from midnight. Every hour leaves its own signature. You realize how closely these people live with the natural world. Not in opposition to it, not attempting to conquer it, but paying constant attention to it. The weather, the stars, the animals, the fire, each offers quiet information to anyone willing to notice. Perhaps that is one of the greatest lessons hidden within this longhouse. Survival is not built only upon strength. It is built upon observation, upon patience, upon understanding. Outside, the eastern sky finally begins to surrender the faintest hint of darkness. Not sunlight, not yet. Only the slightest suggestion that somewhere beyond the horizon, another day is preparing to begin. The longest night is almost over. At first, you think you are imagining it. The longhouse is still wrapped in darkness. The fire still glows softly at its center. The people around you remain asleep beneath thick layers of wool and fur. Nothing seems different, and yet, the darkness has changed. It no longer feels endless. It has become softer somehow. Almost as though the night itself has grown tired after keeping watch for so many hours. You open your eyes and stare toward the smoke hole high above the hearth. Only a short while ago, it framed a sky filled with brilliant stars. Now, only one or two still remain. The rest have quietly surrendered to a pale grey sky that is still far from daylight, yet no longer completely black. Morning always arrives this way, not suddenly, patiently, almost shyly. The first hint of light is so delicate that it would be easy to miss if you were not already awake. Beside the hearth, Eirik notices it too. He has been awake for several minutes, feeding another small bundle of birch twigs into the rekindled fire. The flames answer eagerly now, climbing higher than they have since midnight. Fresh warmth begins spreading across the great hall once again. The sleeping family does not stir immediately. The human body understands warmth. It clings to sleep a little longer when comfort returns. The smell inside the longhouse changes once more. Fresh birch smoke carries a sweeter scent than the older embers. Someone has placed a small iron kettle near the fire. Soon the faint aroma of warming water begins mixing with smoke, wool, and seasoned timber. Morning has its own perfume. Outside, the world waits. Fresh snow has covered almost every footprint left the previous evening. The paths between the buildings have disappeared completely beneath smooth white drifts. Fences have become gentle rolling lines beneath soft blankets of snow. The village itself appears untouched, as though no one has ever lived here. You begin to understand why snowfall often feels magical. It has the remarkable ability to erase yesterday. Every morning after a storm begins with a clean page. Eric walks quietly toward the heavy wooden door. His boots are already waiting exactly where he left them beside the hearth. The leather has dried overnight. Not perfectly, but enough. He slips them on carefully. Even this simple task reminds you how different daily life once was. Modern footwear often lasts for years with little thought. A Viking's boots required constant attention. Leather dried, cracked, absorbed water, needed fresh grease to remain supple through countless winters. Small repairs prevented much larger problems. Nothing was disposable. Nothing was taken for granted. He reaches for the great wooden latch. The hall grows strangely expectant. Even those still asleep seem aware that morning is arriving. A flood of cold blue light spills gently across the packed earth floor. Only the quiet light of dawn reflected from endless snow. The difference is astonishing. The fire glows orange. The snow glows blue. For a brief moment, the entire hall is painted in two colors at once: warmth and winter. The air rushing through the doorway feels sharper than before. The storm has cleared. Clear skies often bring colder temperatures. Your breath immediately becomes visible again. Outside, the village stands perfectly still. No wind, no falling snow, only silence. It is the remarkable silence that follows a great storm. Even the forest seems to be listening. Eric steps onto the fresh snow. It reaches almost halfway to his boots. Each step produces the crisp, unmistakable crunch of newly frozen powder. No two sounds are exactly alike. Snow has countless voices: dry snow, wet snow, deep snow, wind-packed snow. Experienced people learn to recognize each one beneath their feet. You follow him into the pale morning. The cold greets you once again, but it feels different now. Yesterday evening, it seemed threatening. Now, it feels clean, honest. The eastern horizon has begun glowing faintly behind distant hills. Not orange, not yet. Only a gentle silver that slowly spreads upward through the sky. A raven circles high above the village. Its black wings stand out sharply against the snow below. For the Norse, ravens were familiar companions of the landscape. Intelligent birds that watched settlements closely, always ready to investigate the possibility of food. They became woven into stories and beliefs, not because they were mysterious, but because people encountered them almost every day. The bird lands upon the roof of the smithy. It tilts its head, watches, waits. Somewhere farther away, another answers with a single sharp call. The village is waking, very slowly. A faint plume of smoke begins rising from another nearby roof. Then another. Families throughout the settlement are waking exactly as this one has. Stirring embers, heating water, preparing breakfast. Another winter day begins. The world feels peaceful. Yet you know that peace is built upon work already completed. Firewood stacked before autumn. Grain harvested before frost. Roofs repaired before snowfall. Nothing about this quiet morning happened by accident. Preparation created it. You pause for one last look across the valley. The rising light reveals countless pine trees bowing beneath heavy snow. Beyond them stretch frozen rivers, rocky hills, and distant mountains fading into pale morning mist. It is breathtaking, beautiful, and demanding. Life here has never been easy. Perhaps that is why people learn to appreciate moments like this so deeply. Simple moments, a warm house, a healthy family, fresh bread, a fire that survived the night. Another sunrise. Those things were never ordinary. They were achievements. You take one slow breath of the freezing air. It fills your lungs with the scent of snow, pine, and clean winter. Behind you, laughter drifts gently from inside the longhouse. Leaf is awake. The children have discovered fresh snow. Already they are asking if they may help clear the paths before breakfast. Astrid's voice answers with amused patience. After you eat. Some things truly never change. Children, mere matter the century, are always eager to play before finishing their morning meal. Eirik smiles without turning around. The longhouse behind him is no longer simply a building. After one long winter night, it has become something much more. A place where generations have endured together, where stories have outlived those who first told them, where ordinary people accomplished extraordinary things simply by caring for one another through another freezing night. The sun has still not risen, but its arrival is now inevitable. The longest darkness has passed, another day belongs to the living, and yours is only just beginning. Morning does not arrive with sudden noise. It unfolds gently, almost reluctantly, as though the longhouse itself is slowly stretching awake after enduring another long winter night. The first sounds are almost too quiet to notice. A blanket shifts. Someone clears their throat. A child sighs before rolling over one final time. The fire, now burning with fresh life, crackles steadily at the center of the hall, sending warm orange light dancing across the smoke-darkened beams overhead. The room feels different. Only an hour ago, every face rested peacefully beneath layers of wool and fur. Now the stillness begins to dissolve. Astrid is the first to stand. She moves carefully between the sleeping benches, accustomed to navigating the hall without disturbing anyone unnecessarily. Even after countless mornings, she steps around scattered boots, wooden bowls, and the old sheepdog with practiced ease. Skull lifts his head. His ears twitch. Seeing that it is only Astrid, he gives a sleepy wag of his tail before lowering his head once more onto his paws. The hall smells of fresh birch smoke. The sweeter scent tells you the fire has truly awakened. It is no longer surviving the night. It is preparing for the day. Astrid kneels beside a large wooden bucket standing near one of the support posts. The water inside is bitterly cold. A thin layer of ice has formed across the surface during the night, despite the warmth of the hearth. She taps it gently with a carved wooden ladle. The fragile sheet breaks with a satisfying crack. Small pieces drift quietly beneath the surface. Rather than wasting precious firewood trying to warm every bucket of water, only what is needed is heated. Fuel represents time. Every log stacked outside required someone to fell the tree, cut it into lengths, split it, carry it home, and allow it to dry for months. Nothing burns carelessly. She places an iron kettle above the growing flames. Soon, thin ribbons of steam begin to curl from its spout. The familiar scent of warming water mixes with the smell of smoke and timber. Eirik has already stepped outside once more. Through the partially open doorway, you hear the rhythmic scrape of a wooden shovel pushing fresh snow away from the entrance. Each stroke is slow, methodical. There is no frustration in the work. Snow is expected. Preparing a path is simply another morning task. You step outside for a moment. The cold greets you with surprising sharpness. The storm has left behind a world transformed. Every rooftop wears a thick white blanket. Fence posts rise from the drifts like weathered stone markers. The narrow footpaths between buildings have almost vanished. Fresh snow sparkles beneath the growing light, untouched except for the trail Eirik has begun clearing toward the animal shelter. Each breath fills your lungs with air so crisp it almost seems sweet. Across the village, other doors begin to open. Small plumes of smoke rise from one roof after another. No loud voices carry through the morning. People greet one another with quiet nods rather than cheerful shouting. Sound behaves differently after heavy snowfall. The snow absorbs it. The entire village feels wrapped in gentle silence. A woman from the neighboring household carries 2 wooden buckets suspended from a shoulder yoke. A young boy follows behind, carefully placing his feet in the tracks she has already made. He pauses to brush snow from the top of a low fence before continuing. No one wastes movement. Every step has purpose. The village is awake now. Not bustling. Simply alive. You return to the warmth of the longhouse just as Leif finally opens his eyes. For a moment, he seems uncertain where he is. Then his face brightens. "The snow," he blurts, sitting upright so quickly that his blanket slips onto the floor. Astrid cannot help smiling. It will still be there after breakfast. Leif glances toward the doorway as though considering whether breakfast might somehow be skipped. His lady sister watches him closely. She reaches for her boots without saying a word. Children have changed remarkably little over the centuries. Outside, fresh snow promises endless adventure. Inside, adults insist that practical matters come first. The household slowly begins dressing. You notice that no one wears a single heavy garment. Instead, each person adds layers. A soft linen undergarment, where available. A thick wool tunic. Another wool layer if the cold demands it. Heavy cloaks remain hanging near the entrance until needed outdoors. Wool is everywhere. It traps warmth even when damp. It can be repaired repeatedly. It lasts for years when cared for properly. A successful flock of sheep meant far more than warm clothing. It meant security. Sigrid settles herself beside the fire, with a bundle of carded wool resting across her lap. Even before breakfast, her hands instinctively begin working. Twist, pull, turn. The spindle begins its familiar dance once again. Some habits become as natural as breathing. Across the hall, Bjorn examines yesterday's repaired sled runner. He runs one thumb along its smooth surface before nodding with quiet satisfaction. The storm has delayed travel, but it has also provided another opportunity. Fresh snow will make hauling heavy loads easier once the paths are cleared. Winter often creates problems. It also solves others. Astrid begins preparing the morning meal. Unlike last night's hearty stew, breakfast is modest. A pot of barley porridge simmers gently over the fire, stirred with a long wooden spoon polished smooth by years of use. She adds a small piece of butter from a sealed crock, watching it melt slowly into the grain. For the children, she drizzles a little honey into 2 bowls. Not enough to make it extravagant, just enough to brighten the morning. Honey is valuable. It is treated with quiet respect. Alongside the porridge sits coarse rye bread baked several days earlier. The crust has become firm, but a few moments near the fire soften it pleasantly. A little smoked cheese is sliced into thin portions. Nothing lavish, everything nourishing. The meal reflects the season. Simple foods that store well through long winters and provide the energy needed for hours of work in the cold. As everyone gathers once more around the hearth, you notice how naturally the room transforms. Only hours ago, these same benches served as beds. Now blankets have been folded away, mattresses stacked neatly, and the hall once again becomes the center of daily life. The change happens without discussion. No one gives instructions. Everyone knows their role. Generations of repetition have made these routines almost effortless. Leif receives his bowl of porridge with visible impatience. He blows across the steaming surface far too quickly before attempting an eager spoonful. Immediately he pulls back. "Still hot?" Bjorn asks with a grin. Leif nods, rubbing his tongue dramatically. Gentle laughter spreads around the hall. Even Eirik smiles. The warmth of shared humor feels every bit as important as the warmth of the fire. As you take your own first spoonful, you realize something that has quietly become clear over the course of this long night. The strength of this household does not come from legendary warriors or magnificent ships. It comes from countless ordinary moments. A fire tended before dawn. Boots drying beside the hearth. A grandmother spinning wool. Parents sharing food fairly among their children. Neighbors greeting one another after a storm. These simple acts are rarely celebrated in epic poems, yet they are the foundation upon which every voyage, every harvest, and every saga depends. Outside, the first true rays of sunlight finally reach the highest branches of the pine forest. Golden light spills across the untouched snow. The longest night has ended. Another winter day has begun. And the Longhouse, having sheltered its family safely through darkness, now prepares to meet the challenges of daylight once again. By the time the last bowls of warm porridge have been emptied, the daylight has grown noticeably stronger. It is still the soft light of a northern winter morning, low upon the horizon and filtered through a pale sky. But it is enough to fill the Longhouse with a gentle grey glow that reaches places the fire never could. The shadows retreat toward the far corners of the hall. Details that were hidden through the night quietly return. The grain of the timber posts, the carved knotwork above the doorway, the bundles of herbs hanging beneath the rafters. Even the smoke lingering beneath the roof seems lighter now, turning silver where the daylight touches it. The Longhouse feels awake. Not hurried, simply ready. Astrid wipes the last wooden bowl with a small piece of coarse bread before handing it to Skoll, who accepts the unexpected gift with obvious gratitude. The old sheepdog wastes nothing. Neither does anyone else. Every crumb has value. Even the water used to rinse the bowls will later find another purpose, carried outside for the animals or poured where it can do some good instead of simply being thrown away. Waste belongs to wealthy societies. Resourcefulness belongs to those who expect winter to test them. Leif is already waiting by the door. His boots are on. His wool cap sits crookedly over one ear. One mitten has somehow disappeared. Astrid notices immediately. You'll lose the other before midday if you don't find its partner. Leif looks around the hall with exaggerated seriousness, lifting blankets, peering beneath benches, and even checking beside Skoll, who watches the entire search with mild curiosity. The missing mitten eventually appears, tucked inside one of his boots. Bjorn laughs quietly. You hid it from yourself. Leif grins. I was keeping it warm. The adults exchange amused glances. Children have always possessed a remarkable talent for explaining small mysteries. Once everyone is properly dressed, Eirik lifts the heavy latch. The great oak door swings outward. Bright winter light pours into the hall. The air is so cold that it almost sparkles. Every breath becomes a drifting cloud. Fresh snow reflects the morning sun until the entire village seems brighter than the sky above it. For a moment, everyone pauses. There is something about the first clear morning after a storm that invites quiet appreciation. The world appears newly made. The roofs are smooth and white. The fences wear rounded caps of snow. Even the branches of the pines bend gracefully beneath their fresh burden. No one speaks. There is no need. Some moments are complete without words. Then, almost together, the household begins moving. Not because anyone gives orders, because everyone already knows what must be done. Eirik shoulders a broad wooden snow shovel and begins clearing the path leading from the Longhouse to the byre. Each movement is slow but powerful. The fresh snow is light enough to lift easily, yet deep enough that ignoring it would make every trip between the buildings more difficult. Winter rewards small efforts made early. Astrid walks toward the woodshed. She pauses briefly to inspect the stacked firewood. The neat rows rise almost to the height of the wall, each log carefully split months before and stacked beneath a protective roof where air could dry it without allowing snow to reach it. Many people imagine that gathering firewood was simply a matter of cutting trees whenever fuel ran low. Reality was far less forgiving. Freshly cut wood burns poorly, it smokes heavily, it wastes heat. Good firewood demanded patience. Most of what now keeps the Longhouse warm began as living trees many months ago, felled during the previous season, split by hand, and left to dry through summer and autumn. Every log burning in the hearth represents work completed long before the first snowflake ever fell. Leif joins Eirik with a much smaller shovel. His first attempt sends nearly as much snow onto his own boots as onto the growing pile beside the path. He looks down at the result, considers it carefully, then tries again, this time with considerably more success. Eirik notices, but says nothing. Some lessons are better discovered than explained. Across the village, other families are engaged in the same quiet routine. One man knocks thick snow from the roof of a small storehouse before it grows heavy enough to strain the beams. Two women carry woven baskets toward the communal well, carefully following a narrow track that has already been opened through the drifts. An older boy leads a pair of shaggy ponies toward a sheltered enclosure, their breath rising in great white clouds around their heads. No one appears idle, yet no one appears rushed. The pace of winter is deliberate. Energy is valuable. There is little sense in wasting it through unnecessary haste. You follow Bjorn toward the byre. The moment the door opens, a wave of warmer air greets you, carrying the familiar sense of hay, leather, wool, and livestock. The animals have been waiting patiently. The cow lets out a deep, contented low. Several sheep rise slowly, stretching stiff legs before pressing eagerly toward the fresh hay Bjorn begins scattering into their feeding trough. Watching him work, you notice how gently he handles each animal. These are not merely possessions. Their well-being will shape the fortunes of the household for months to come. Healthy sheep provide wool for clothing. The cow provides milk when the seasons allow. Even manure, unpleasant though it may seem, becomes valuable when spring returns and the fields must be nourished once more. Nothing exists in isolation. Every part of the household depends upon another. Outside, the sun climbs a little higher. Its warmth is almost impossible to feel upon your skin, yet its light transforms everything. Icicles hanging beneath the eaves glitter like crystal. Tiny diamonds of frost sparkle across every fence rail. A raven lands confidently atop the woodpile. Its bright black feathers contrast sharply against the untouched snow. It watches the busy village with intelligent eyes, perhaps hoping that someone might accidentally leave behind an interesting scrap. Leif notices it first. He's back. Sigrid steps outside carrying a small basket. He was here yesterday too. Do you think he remembers us? The old woman smiles. I think he remembers breakfast. Leif nods thoughtfully. That explanation seems entirely reasonable. The raven cocks its head as though listening. Then, deciding that no immediate opportunity has presented itself, it lifts effortlessly into the cold morning air. Its wings beat only a few times before it disappears toward the forest. The village settles into its familiar rhythm. Axes ring softly from somewhere beyond the neighboring houses as another family splits kindling. A spinning wheel hums faintly through an open doorway. Children laugh while rolling small balls of snow, their mittens already damp despite repeated warnings to keep them dry. Life continues, not dramatically, not heroically, simply faithfully. You begin to realize something historians have often struggled to communicate. The Viking Age was not built primarily by famous explorers, nor by kings, nor by warriors. It was built by mornings exactly like this one, by people clearing snow before breakfast, repairing tools before they failed, feeding animals before feeding themselves, preparing carefully for seasons they knew would always return. These ordinary routines supported every extraordinary achievement that later found its way into legend. A ship crossing the North Atlantic depended first upon forests carefully managed for timber. Strong sails depended upon thousands of hours spent spinning wool and weaving cloth. Successful voyages depended upon healthy farms that could support families while crews were away. Adventure rested upon ordinary work. The connection is impossible to ignore once you begin looking for it. Eric drives the last shovel into the snowbank beside the path. He straightens slowly, resting both hands upon the handle. The cleared walkway now stretches from the Longhouse to the byre and onward toward the neighboring houses. Simple, practical, necessary. He looks across the village. Smoke rises peacefully from every roof. Children's voices drift through the crisp morning air. The storm has passed. Life has resumed. Another winter day has begun, exactly as countless others have before it. And that quiet continuity, more than any battle or voyage, is perhaps the truest measure of the Viking world. The morning settles comfortably across the valley. The storm that only hours before had hidden the world behind walls of blowing snow has become little more than a memory. Fresh drifts still cover the fields. The pine forests remain heavy beneath white branches. The frozen fjord glitters beneath the low winter sun. But life has already begun again. Standing just outside the Longhouse, you realize something you could not have understood the evening before. This building, for all its warmth and comfort, could never survive alone. From where you stand, another Longhouse sits perhaps 50 paces away. Its roof is nearly identical. Its walls are built from the same great timbers. Thin blue smoke rises steadily through its roof vent, twisting upward into the crisp morning air, before vanishing into the pale winter sky. Another family has also survived the night. A little farther away, another plume of smoke, then another. Soon you count nearly a dozen. Each one marks a household, a family, a fire that someone carefully protected through the darkness. The village is not simply a collection of buildings, it is a web of people whose lives are quietly tied together. During the warmth of summer, every household works its own fields. Children chase sheep across green hillsides. Fishing boats leave the shore before sunrise. Blacksmiths shape glowing iron, while carpenters repair wagons and boats. The days are long, often astonishingly long. Far to the north, the summer sun barely seems willing to set. Winter changes everything. Travel becomes slower. The sea grows dangerous. The fields sleep beneath snow. Families spend more time together beneath their own roofs. Yet the village does not become isolated. Quite the opposite. Winter often reminds everyone just how much they depend upon one another. A broken sled may require a neighbor's help. A sick animal may need another family's experience. A damaged roof after a heavy storm can seldom be repaired by one pair of hands alone. The image of the Viking as a solitary hero standing against the world has endured for centuries. Reality was usually far more practical. Communities survived because people cooperated. Eirik finishes clearing the final stretch of snow leading toward the neighboring houses. He leans upon his shovel for only a moment before hearing another voice. Looks like the roof held. It is an older man from the next farm. His beard is completely white now, though his shoulders remain broad despite the passing years. He carries an axe over one shoulder, not because danger threatens, but because another family has already asked for help, cutting a fallen pine blocking the path toward the shoreline.
It always complains, the old man laughs, but it never gives up.
There is something wonderfully ordinary about the exchange. No grand speeches, no dramatic embraces, only neighbors beginning another day together. Leif runs ahead through the snow, stopping every few steps to examine the tracks left during the night. Here, delicate prints no larger than his thumb. A hare. There, a neat line of tiny impressions weaving between bushes. Perhaps a fox. He kneels carefully, brushing loose snow aside with one mitten. The tracks seem fresh. Sigrid joins him at an unhurried pace. You can tell they were made before dawn. How? The edges. She points gently. When snow falls after an animal walks by, the tracks become softer. Leif studies them carefully.
They're still sharp. She nods. The fox passed after the storm.
He smiles proudly. Already another lesson has become part of his growing understanding of the world. No classroom, no written book, only patient observation shared between generations.
This is how knowledge often survives.
Not through great discoveries, through countless small conversations. Nearby, Bjorn kneels beside the sled he repaired the previous evening. Fresh snow has transformed the village paths into smooth white roads. He pushes the sled forward experimentally. The runners glide effortlessly. He smiles. Yesterday's careful work has already proven worthwhile. You notice how naturally everyone moves between one another's homes. One woman carries a basket of fresh bread toward an elderly widow living alone. A young man helps his cousin lift heavy logs toward the woodshed. Children drift between houses almost as freely as birds moving through the trees. Hospitality was deeply rooted in Norse culture. Travel across Scandinavia could be difficult and dangerous, particularly during winter. A warm meal, a place by the fire, or a bed beneath a secure roof might one day mean the difference between life and death. That practical reality shaped expectations. Generosity was admired, not simply because it was kind, but because everyone understood they might someday depend upon it themselves. The village blacksmith steps outside his workshop carrying a bundle of charcoal. His forge remains cold for the moment. There is little urgency. Metalworking demands patience. He checks the bellows for cracks caused by yesterday's freezing temperatures. Leather stiffens in winter. Wood shrinks. Iron expands and contracts. Every craft changes with the seasons. Nothing remains exactly the same throughout the year. Far beyond the village, sunlight finally reaches the upper slopes of the surrounding mountains. For a brief moment, their snowy peaks blaze with brilliant gold, while the valley below remains wrapped in soft blue shadow. The contrast is breathtaking. The Norse lived within landscapes that constantly reminded them in nature's scale. Mountains that dwarfed every building. Forests stretching beyond sight. Seas capable of carrying ships across oceans, or destroying them within minutes. Living here encouraged humility. The land was generous, but it demanded respect. You find yourself looking back toward the Longhouse. Smoke still rises gently from the roof. Only last night, it seemed enormous, a complete world contained beneath one timber roof. Now, seen from the outside, it has become part of something larger. A village, a community, a shared way of life. It reminds you that history often narrows its focus too tightly. We remember famous kings, celebrated explorers, legendary warriors. Yet every one of them once belonged to a household much like this. Someone baked their bread, someone mended their cloak, someone kept the fire burning while they slept. Behind every extraordinary story stands thousands of ordinary lives rarely mentioned by name. Perhaps that is the greatest lesson this long winter night has offered. History is not only shaped by remarkable people, it is sustained by ordinary ones. The children begin laughing again. Leif has discovered that fresh snow slides beautifully across the smooth wooden sled. Skull bounds after him with surprising enthusiasm for a dog of his age, scattering loose powder with every joyful stride. Even Eirik cannot suppress a smile. For just a few moments, work gives way to simple happiness. Winter, despite all its hardships, still leaves room for play. You close your eyes for a single slow breath. The cold air carries the scent of pine resin, wood smoke, fresh snow, the faint salt of the distant sea. 1,000 years have passed since mornings like this filled the valleys of Scandinavia. The houses have changed, the tools have changed, the world has changed. Yet standing here, watching smoke curl upward while children laugh in newly fallen snow, it becomes surprisingly easy to believe that some parts of being human have never changed at all. The Longhouse behind you grows quieter once more as Astrid tidies the last traces of breakfast. Another day's work is beginning. Another evening will eventually come. Another fire will be lit. Another story will be told. And another family will gather beneath the same smoke-darkened beams. The rhythm continues, season after season, generation after generation, long after individual names have been forgotten.